Podium light?
Good evening, and welcome to TIFF Bell Lightbox. My name is Christoph Straub, and I'm the Senior Manager of Adult Learning here at TIFF. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to tonight's special event, Trek Talks, Mae Jemison on Star Trek and the Future. On behalf of TIFF, I'd like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oréal Paris and Visa, and our major public supporters, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto. I'd also like to acknowledge, as a charitable organization, we'd also like to thank our donors and members for making TIFF's year-round programming and educational and community outreach initiatives possible. I'd like to acknowledge the Mississaugas of New Credit, the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat, the original keepers of this land, for hosting us this evening and for hosting TIFF year-round on their territory. Tonight's event is presented in partnership with CBS and the Canadian Space Agency. We'd like to thank these organizations for all of their efforts in making Trek Talks a reality. A big welcome to we'd also like to thank the licensing shop for their help in the series. And a big welcome to all of those audience members joining us online via live stream as well. So we'll have additional audience members online tonight. A few reminders: we ask that you please place your phones on silent. Taking photos or recording video is not allowed at any point during the event, but we do have, as you can see, professional cameras capturing it. During the Q&A, we ask that you wait for a microphone to reach you before asking your question. Tonight's event is the last event in our Trek Talks series, a major initiative in celebration of the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. Writer and producer Gene Roddenberry and his collaborators conceived of a future where enhanced technologies, progressive values, and tolerant social structures were hopeful models of diversity and cooperation. From this starting point, our Trek Talk series featured roundtable discussions and keynote presentations that considered the influence of Star Trek in the areas of television, film, technology, space exploration, education, politics, and social justice. If you're interested in seeing the other talks as part of the Trek Talk series, we invite you to explore them on our YouTube channel or Facebook, where we have all of the footage online available. And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to our host for this evening, who will introduce our special guest. Nora Young is the host and creator of Spark, CBC's national radio show and podcast about technology and culture. She was the founding host of the CBC's Definitely Not the Opera, where she often focused on new media and technology. As a journalist, author, and speaker, Nora explores how new technology shapes the way we understand ourselves and the world around us. Her book, The Virtual Self, is published by McClelland and Stewart, and her favorite technology is her bicycle. Please join me in welcoming Nora Young.
Thanks. Hi, I'm really thrilled to be here tonight to lead a conversation with Mae Jemison about Star Trek, the future, interstellar travel, and her impressive career as an astronaut and an advocate for the integration of science and the arts. Dear to my heart, this is part of TIFF's Trek Talks series. Mae is really a true trailblazer. She's an engineer, a social scientist, and the former area Peace Corps medical officer for Sierra Leone and Liberia. She's the first woman of color to go into space. Mae Jemison served 6 years as a NASA astronaut, and as we'll hear more about this evening, she was the first astronaut to appear on Star Trek. Mae founded the Dorothy Jemison Foundation for Excellence, and she's also a member of the National Academy of Medicine and the National Women's Hall of Fame. And, as if that's not enough, she sits on the boards of several Fortune 500 companies. She was voted one of the top 7 women leaders in a 2000 presidential ballot national straw poll. That was in light of her integration of the physical and social sciences with art and culture, which I know is something that's very important to her, in order to solve problems and foster innovation. Mae Jemison is currently leading the 100-Year Starship, which is a new initiative that aims to make human travel beyond our solar system a reality within the next 100 years. So please join me in welcoming our esteemed guest, Mae Jemison. Hi, Mae. Welcome to Toronto.
Thank you very much.
So, I want to start this by setting a little bit of the context where you got an incredibly impressive career, and we're going to talk about the 100-Year Starship Initiative and that. But I want to start by taking us back to your childhood. You grew up in Chicago, and I've read that you were interested in both science and the arts from a young age, and in particular, nature and dance. So, and I know this is a theme that's kind of continued throughout your life, the science and the arts. So, can you talk a little bit about your early recollections of encountering the world from that perspective?
Well, one of the things that I did for getting ready for this is I put together a couple of more than a couple of slides, but really talking about how your life is a journey. There are things that happen, and as you go through life, it's everything that happened from the day you were born all the way through when you start a project. It builds into what you do, right? All of that is part of what you do. So I started off really talking about 100-Year Starship just from the point of view because it's something where I am right now, and it's sort of a culmination of so many things. And the first word we talk about it is inclusive. Sort of the very first term is inclusive. And that's what my life has been, and that's the way I think of things. And when I think about humans in cosmology, what we do, why am I interested in space? What does it happen? I think it comes from this West African proverb that says, no one shows a child the sky. Right? It is part of everything we do. Every group of people around the world have looked up at the stars and wondered what they were. Space exploration didn't start back in 1957 with Sputnik. It started, 1,000 generations before when someone looked up at the stars and figured out they were moving. Right. And so we all come from that rich heritage. And just as a little kid growing up on the south side of Chicago, I loved looking at the stars. I love space. I love lots of things. Now, I was a little kid. I played with Barbie dolls, right? And this is my recommendation. I played with Barbie dolls, loved chemistry sets, and I was an original series Star Trek fan, and that had an impact on me. Original series. Growing up in the 60s, I was very interested in space, and I wanted to be a fashion designer, but I studied the concepts of Big Bang and infinity, and there were all these things that I wanted to do, and I think that's part of being a child. So there's no point in time where I can recognize and say, hey, this is when I became interested in science, because I think kids are interested in science. We come out of the chute interested in the world around us. And so many times people think of that interest in the world as only being, about chemicals or plants or things. But growing up on the south side of Chicago, I remember the riots of 1968, following Martin Luther King's assassination, the Democratic National Convention that had been in Chicago. I remember the National Guard marching behind the vacant lot in my home. And being afraid for my father gone to work that day. That's all a part of what you see. And see, this was going on concurrently with the Apollo program. And I was this little kid who was running around telling everybody, that this space is really cool. And here's what's going to happen when you go to the moon and all of these kinds of things. But yet at the same time, all these things are happening. And people would ask questions about, is this necessary? How do we spend money on this? Why do we do these things? But being like any little kid, I had other things I wanted to do. I wanted to be a dancer, right? Like Judith Jamison, right? And I was able to do some of those things because life is multifaceted. I wanted to dance like Lola Falana, Jerome Robbins, West Side Story, all of those things. So all the way through school, I danced. So while I'm doing my science projects, I'm also dancing. I'm taking studio art classes constantly. That was part of life. And then there was space, right? It was always a constant. I assumed that I would go into space.
Even from a childhood, you
I
assumed
assumed that I'd
go
go into space.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be an astronaut. This is not a semantics game, because I was convinced by the time I was old enough to go into space that I would be on Mars working as a scientist or, doing something else. I was really quite irritated when I finally went up that I didn't get to do that. But I really did. I just assumed I'd go into space. And this is despite the fact that the United States didn't have any women astronauts. And I knew that was foolish. People tried to counsel me as to why there weren't women astronauts. There's nonsense. We can talk about the Mercury 13 and the women who did the work that they did are hidden figures, like, for example, the movie that's coming out about Katherine Johnson. We can talk about all those things, but as a little kid, I just sort of innately knew that, of course, women had the right stuff. I had the right stuff
Yeah,
to
yeah.
do that. But it was all part of this, right? It was
Mhm.
all part of this. But I show these pictures just to help us focus that, you don't just do one thing. There are lots of things that you like to do.
Mhm. I know that you've spoken about Nichelle Nichols and her portrayal of Lieutenant Uhura as a major inspiration in your pursuit of a career in space travel. So, just in terms of reflecting on that time when you were growing up, what was it like to see a woman of color in a leadership role on the bridge, albeit in fiction?
So I want to clarify something because people always say that, and I never said that was my inspiration.
Ah, okay.
I always said that I wanted to go into space. I didn't give a damn if anybody had been there or not.
Right.
Right? It really, I mean, this is important because sometimes we have this whole thing about you have to see somebody else doing it. Well, if nobody else has done it, how do you see them doing it?
Mhm.
You sometimes have to see yourself there. But I love Nichelle Nichols. I love Lieutenant Uhura. She's a good friend of mine. Now, it was an affirmation, right? It was an affirmation that other people felt like I did, that we all belong there, and that affirmation was really important. Um, One of the things we also sort of fail to look at is that you can have lots of different people. They don't have to look exactly like you. I love Mr. Spock. I wanted to be the science officer. I loved Mr. Spock, right? Captain Kirk irritated the hell out of me.
How come?
I actually appreciate him more now, but as a little kid, oh my God. My favorite episodes is whenever Spock would get emotions.
Yeah.
What would he do? Yeah, he all that he had built up in the past. But no, but what it meant, I think, by having Lieutenant Uhura on the bridge is again that it was an affirmation. Having a woman in a technical role on a starship was really important. But then if you looked at the bridge of the Enterprise, it had people from all around the world on it.
Yeah.
One of the influences that Star Trek probably also had on me, um, in one way, so we were in a race with the Russians, right? We were and the race wasn't just in space. We were, finding different particles in the Olympics, who ran the fastest, all of that kind of things. I took Russian when I was in high school
Really?
because I assumed that one day we'd figure out how to work together, right? And there was the Apollo Soyuz program and things like that. So I took Russian in high school.
Mhm.
So, I mean, sometimes the influence is not as direct as people sort of think it is because they sort of look at you and they look at someone else and they say, that's it. But Star Trek was an incredible program because it looked at a brighter future,
Mhm.
right? That we got through all of this nonsense, that we figured things out. And science was right in the center of things. And it allowed us to examine the world. We have these pictures about the civil rights and art and stuff. Star Trek examined social issues, right? It used science and as a backdrop for us to be able to examine social issues in different ways.
Mhm. Have you ever found it challenging to have, because you had such a passion for the arts and also science, but those two are so often, separated as two distinct disciplines, and never the twain shall meet. Have you ever found that challenging to be in that role?
I haven't ever found it challenging. I think the issue is whether or not you let people's other perceptions influence you. So people have this whole thing about the arts are being creative and the sciences are not, but they're both creative, right? They're creative and I always think of the sciences, the physical sciences, as our our ability to influence the universe that's external to us. And the arts are us influencing people through things that are personal, right? So one of them is making the personal universal in the arts, and the other is looking at these universal concepts. And you need both of them to come up with solutions. That you need both of them to come up with solutions because different people perceive things in different ways. So I've never me personally had a problem with the arts. I think sometimes it's this struggle to get outside of the box people want to put you in. They want to see you as this one thing, right? But we're much more than that.
Yeah.
We're much more than that.
Yeah. So you went to Stanford where you pursued this because you did a BS in chemical engineering and a BA in African and Afro-American studies. Can you tell me a bit about your experience there?
So I grew up, I was pretty precocious. I never liked that. I didn't know what that word meant when I was a little kid, and people used to say I was precocious. I don't know what that meant. But I was the third child, so by the time I came through, my parents were already tired, you know. So, my sister had gone to, to Wesleyan. She was in the first class of girls there. She was like, um, the teacher's pet, everything, right? Homecoming queen, you name it, that she was it. So my poor brother, who was a year younger than her, you can imagine what he got coming through. And by the time I came through, the teacher still remembered, but my parents were tired, so it didn't matter. But I went to Stanford because they did something called Razzle Dazzle football. I love football. I wanted to play football. They had co-ed intramural football game. And they run the Rose Bowl 2 years in a row back to back. And they had a great engineering school. I mean, I don't know. There's some people in here who might, if you followed football back then, collegiate football, might remember some of those sort of lateral passes and all this kind of stuff when football was really fun. Um, so that's the reason I went. And it was in California, and it had great engineering. And the reason I did chemical engineering is because at the time I wanted to do something called biomedical engineering, but it wasn't a formal field yet. And the person they put with me as an advisor who was doing research in biomedical engineering said, I should get a formal degree so that people would know what I did. And I ended up majoring in African studies. It was happenstance. And when I look back at it, I recognize that I was taking a lot of classes because some of the professors in some of the physical sciences weren't that thrilled to see me in their classroom. And so you need a good feeling. Now I went to an integrated high school in Chicago, and all my teachers thought I was great. We had, I did advanced placement physics and all of those kinds of things. But some of the professors, you get this feeling that they weren't that thrilled about having me in their classrooms. But the poli-sci professors, the linguistics professors, it was fine. So I think I took those classes just because it felt good, right? Because sometimes you just need that external pat on the back. And I didn't leave the physical sciences. I was not, because I went to school when I was 16. I don't believe I was socialized well enough to actually care as much about what the professors thought of me as I should have, right? So if I was 18 and I had gotten rid of some of that, chip on your shoulder that teenagers have, and I started caring, I may have not have finished in engineering, which a lot of women didn't, right? Because they sort of feel like they're not supposed to be there and they take it to heart. But I was just sort of like, well, I'm going to be in here. Even if you don't like me, I'm going to stay right here with you. But, you still need that other thing that makes you feel good. So I think that's part of the reason why I did. So by the time I got to my senior year, I was 2 courses shy of being an African studies major. And basically it was just sort of specific classes you had to take.
Mm-hmm. So then you attended Cornell Medical College and you became a doctor of medicine. And so then what led you to apply to NASA's astronaut program? How did that opportunity present itself? Or
So it's really easy. I wanted to go into space. It's so easy.
is that
I wanted to go into space, so I could stand in an Indiana cornfield with the aluminum foil on my head, but that wasn't necessarily going to get me there, right? So after for medical school, I didn't apply directly. They were actually starting to bring in the class of shuttle astronauts my senior year in college. And of course I was too young or didn't have enough experience and stuff to do that. So I knew that at some point in time I was going to apply. When I went to finish medical school, I went overseas and I worked as a in West Africa for 2.5 years as Area Peace Corps medical officer, and I learned a lot about developing countries and development and what was going on in the world in other ways, and that was really important to me going along. So um, I did something really easy. I called down the Johnson Space Flight Center. I said, I'd like an application for the astronaut program. They didn't laugh at me. They sent me the application. I filled it out.
Wow.
As a as a government, it was a standard government form with a couple of other sort of supplemental pages. It was really funny because they asked you for your transcripts, right, from college. And wow, had already done all this stuff with the State Department. I was having to send in college and medical school transcripts, which was really interesting. And then they brought you down for interviews. Now, I was in the first class after the Challenger accident, and my application was actually in at the time of the Challenger accident, and they closed that application process down, and then they renewed it. And when I went to the interviews, I was convinced that my patients had all called down and told them every test I had ever ordered on them. And they made sure that I got those tests because they were looking at people who are physiologically healthy. And the other things that was really interesting for me is sort of on the astronaut review board, the people they're interviewing, there was John Young, and John Young was in the second class of astronauts, and I remembered him from when I was a little kid, so I'm sort of sitting there like, you have to actually try to be a little cool because you don't want folks to know that you're that. But I'm thinking, there's John Young. And then Anna Fisher was on it, and I remember seeing her in the first group of women who had come in. So it was this really interesting montage of people.
Did you have any trepidation about going into space, especially after Challenger?
No. So it was all completely voluntary. So and by the time, so I came in after the Challenger accident. My application process was in work, and so when you're going into space that you're sitting on tons of high explosives, and it's a controlled explosion. So things can go wrong, but you have never ever had so many people worried about your safety and your health. So there's a very different thing. By the time I got to the astronaut program, I told you I'd worked in a Cambodian refugee camp during the time. I'd gone along the border with the Thai military, right? And I'd worked by myself in conditions in West Africa where I ran into some diseases that I was really afraid of them because some hemorrhagic viruses and stuff, where as a medical officer, I had to do an autopsy on somebody who had died up country of that. And doctors die from those viruses. So I had already been around a couple of things that made me a little nervous. But it's no, so I wanted to be there. I was where I wanted to be.
Yeah. I'm sure you've been asked this. Sorry. I'm sure you've been asked this a million times, but can you tell us about the moment when you see Earth from space, especially after having traveled around so much and seen so much?
True story. The first thing I saw from space was Chicago. True story. I launched on the middeck. I was actually supposed to go to sleep 2 hours after I got into space because I was working the night shift. So we're not going to sleep 2 hours. But I had this timeline where we had to do all this work in the middeck, and the commander called me up. Hoot Gibson called me up to the flight deck to look out the window. I looked out the window, and there was Chicago. So I had this big grin on my face for that little girl who assumed that she would go into space. I mean, that was the whole thing, that you made it, that you did it. It was just this really complete feeling. And probably the most memorable thing is that I felt very connected with this planet. So when you sort of go over places you've been. I remember flying over the Nile Delta, and you could see it, and it's sort of the earth shimmers and the sand shimmered, and sort of you're going over the Horn of Africa, and it's this incredible sort of reddish gold kind of color. And so it gives you this connectedness. But my connectedness wasn't just to the earth, it was also to the universe itself, that we, have every right to be here.
Mm-hmm. You described being frustrated at the lack of female astronauts when you were younger. Did you give any thought at the time to, the inspiration that you might be providing to a younger generation of women?
S- So my frustration wasn't about inspiration. I was pissed off because guys were so stupid. I mean, and the reason why I will say that is because it was always there was a group of women called the Mercury 13, and had been test pilots. They had done incredible. They were incredible pilots from World War II, and a number of the docs decided to test them. The docs who had been working with the male astronauts who had picked the original 7 NASA astronauts, they decided to test the women. These women. Now, these were really great pilots because women did most of the test piloting work during World War II because the other males were out flying missions. The women did as well as or better than the men in all the tests. They blew them out of the water in terms of isolation. Tests were supposed to, be a barometer of emotional uh, toughness. And it was stopped because President Johnson said, "Stop this now." It was interesting because a number of researchers actually thought that women would make better pilots, better astronauts because they were smaller, so you don't have to carry as much payload up. Women had less cardiovascular disease, so what we didn't know about the cardiovascular system in the heart would not be as worrisome. They felt that they were more emotionally stable. And these were male researchers back during the time, but the decision was not to go that way. So it's very clear. So for me, it wasn't about needing inspiration. It was about making sure that people had the opportunity. So when I went up into space, it was really cool because it would have been really great if, as a little girl, I had seen me. That's sort of some kind of time paradox kind of thing, but yet at the same time, I think it also makes a difference for the males who are gatekeepers to see the talents that are there so that they won't keep people from being involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have to geek out a little bit at this moment. After your flight into space, you became the first astronaut ever to appear on Star Trek.
So I was 5'9". I weighed a lot less than I do now, but I was 5'9", so I was average height or over average height for the guys. But a lot of the equipment was made for guys, so they looked at women as small men. And that's one of these things. So irritations, women aren't small men. So they would try to put women in small men's flight suits and things. And I used to always say, well, I would love it. Would they ever just get big women's clothing for men? Right? No, I mean, it's funny, right? But yet they would ask you to do this work in stuff that didn't actually fit you well in
Mm-hmm.
many ways. And so those are some of the things that we actually have to move beyond and continue to do and look at when you sort of say what happens with people. So it was great for me because I was at least the height and everything. But when you look at the EVA suits, there's something that the front part of them are heart, the top part are heart. So I'm rattling around in the inside of it because I need the torso length and everything, but my chest wall isn't as big. It's thick. So it has a different feel, and the helmet, your shoulders are doing different things on the helmet than you would do if it was made for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the reason we stopped on that picture.
Yeah. That's a great
But
picture. Yeah, so I did want to ask you about your appearance on Star Trek in the episode Second Chances. So we all want to geek out a little bit, I think. What was it like?
um it was fun. It came about because I lived in Los Angeles before I came to NASA, and the guy who cut my hair was actually cut hair for the movies and stuff like that. He was a stylist for the movies, and he knew LeVar Burton, who played Geordi. And earlier on, I had done a tour through one of the space station mock-ups for LeVar and Whoopi Goldberg when they were on PM Magazine, that old show PM Magazine. So I take them through a tour. And my friend Stefan told LeVar, wouldn't it be cool to have Mae on Star Trek? And so I was literally sitting at home and I got a call from LeVar and said, "Is it true that you would consider going on Star Trek?" Stefan had said that. And I had invited LeVar to my launch. He wasn't able to come, but he wore t-shirts and stuff. And so that's what happened. So they wrote in an episode for me. They wrote in a part for me as Lieutenant Palmer. And I was a transport operator. And it's the episode where there were two Rikers. And from a transport accident, years before I was there, I brought him back, right? So it was a really neat experience. I mean, what was fun about it, it was almost this full circle thing. Not only having watched Star Trek as a kid, but just sort of how fantasy and reality merge with each other and sort of blend and push and pull. And that's the sort of creativity of the arts and how we look at things. What was interesting to me is the realism of the sets. So I was expecting them to be flimsy, but they're really sturdy. They look really, you can almost imagine, like, yeah, I'm there. And you're not supposed to sit in the captain's chair, but I did. I even put my feet up on the thing like Hugh did, right? It was like, you're not supposed to do that, but I did. And it was really, everybody was really gracious, and they're a lot of fun. It was a very warm set. And one of the surprises was Avery Brooks came over from Deep Space Nine to say hello. So that was just, I'm sort of sitting in the captain's chair like I'm not supposed to. And he came through, and then we went over to the Deep Space Nine set, which was an incredible set as well because it was in the round. So the promenade, it literally was in the round, so it was a three-dimensional set that you could walk through.
Yeah. And did people ask you about the experience of actually being in space as
Yeah,
opposed
we
to playing
talked
it?
about things. We talked about a lot of things. And I had the opportunity also on the 25th anniversary. Was it the 25th? I can't remember. I think maybe it was the 30th anniversary of Star Trek, to give out flags that have flown in space to all the Star Trek crews, because we went all the way through Voyager to give out flags. So it was a very good feeling. Now, what's interesting about Star Trek is there are a lot of astronauts who love Star Trek, absolutely adore Star Trek. And there's also, I found out a lot of people who went into engineering because they love Geordi, right? And they thought Geordi was really cool. And that's the reason they went into engineering, I found out as well. So that influence really has a lot to do with how you see things. What does that mean? Sometimes it's not just relating to the character, but it's also relating to the work that they do. Right, and that's what I think Star Trek did really well. Is it sort of showed work and thought processes and very well.
So post your career at NASA, I know that you worked on promoting STEM education for children. What do you think needs to be improved in the way that we approach teaching science and the arts, and maybe the relationship between the two of them?
I don't know that there's a relation. So here's the thing. Right now, we're trying to throw arts into STEM and make it STEAM because people need to figure out a way to justify teaching the arts. I think that's what's happening from what I looked at. We don't have to justify teaching the arts. The arts are important in and of themselves. And it's just like we don't ask the question, what's the relationship between science and STEM and English? Or literature studies or social studies. We don't ask that question because we're not trying to justify reading by, our science by teaching reading. We're not trying to do that. So I think the relationship is that we're learning how to express and see the world. So, when we look at this personal perspective from the arts, where we're trying to get people to understand things, whether it's through storytelling, whether it's painting or music, we're trying to transfer some information. It helps us to connect with one another. The sciences also give us a way of influencing things, but we have to interpret that. What research we do really depends on who we are, how we see the world, our interpretation of what is a threat, right? Our ambitions, what we want to make happen.
And so we need some way of understanding that. We need some way of communicating that to people who may not have had the same experiences we've had. So I think if there's a connection, it's that. It's that the arts allow us to do that. But, you know, so do we call writing part of the arts? Storytelling part of the arts? I don't know. But I think it's the connection is that some kind of way we have to communicate ideas and hopes and dreams and fears, perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And what do we do with them? What tools do we create from the knowledge that we gain from science? I always say, we have a certain combination of minerals. We can either create a fireworks display or we can propel a bullet. What we do with that depends on the people we are. It depends on our fears and our hopes and our dreams.
Mm-hmm. But are there things that you see in terms of, you seem to have developed just very naturally this passion for science and this interest in science from a very young age. So what is the barrier in getting kids interested in that?
So kids love science. Kids love science. The barrier is in maintaining that interest and not beating it out of them. We have this tendency to beat it out of them. Kids, they come out of the chute. They're picking up bugs, snails, they're crawling, they're picking up stuff. You're like, ooh, don't pick that up. They're trying to figure out what's going on. Me, I made mud pies. I was fantastic making mud pies. I looked at drying times, what was the right soil combination, how much water. I mean, it was an art form. But kids love science. The issue is that we as adults many times aren't comfortable with it. Teachers aren't comfortable with it, so they make it very static. Interestingly enough, all the way through, people are interested in science. What are the most popular movies? Science fiction movies, right? They're the most popular, even if they're fantasy or whatever. They're some of the most popular things. It's the procedurals. It's the things about it. We want to understand the world around us. But by having people sort of say science is hard, right? So as a technical journalist, you probably notice this. Sometimes on the news, on the TV, there's the most cogent, clear, great story about a technical topic, right? Just beautiful. And you're like, yeah, that was really great. I understood it. And then the anchor will sign off, well, I couldn't understand that. I hope you did. What the? Right, you've seen that,
Yes.
right? And you're like, why did you do that? Because it's the same thing where people say things like, I can't program the Blu-ray, but my grandbaby can. That's not cute at all. It's not cute. It's just imagine the message that we're passing when we say that. So the barriers are really in what we think and our expectations. How we teach science. If you teach it through rote memorization, it's not that interesting. Right? You lose a lot of it. It's by hands-on. It's by that experimentation. So have a child wire a flashlight, right? That's what makes the difference. So you can see what you can do with it. You can see how it's moving forward. Everybody doesn't have to go into science. But if we push science literacy, it makes a difference. When people start to talk about what does science have to do with them, I just sort of say, well, at least this works with women. Do we want our hairdressers to have some familiarity with pH? A passing familiarity with pH, right? Some of the guys don't know what I'm talking about, but, right? Because it's important, right? We want to have some numeracy. So when you have the whole thing where people come out and they talk about the statistics around breast cancer or something else, you want to know what it means, like a 1 in 5 chance. What does that mean? What materially does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's by not making this so mysterious. Everybody can do science. Everybody can do mathematics. Everybody doesn't have to want to do it professionally. Just like we expect people to read, but they don't have to be professional writers. We're not expecting everybody to be Shakespeare, right? Or Nikki Giovanni. We're not expecting that.
Mm-hmm.
But we do expect them to be literate.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I think the science literacy, the numerical numeracy, makes a difference.
Yeah. Well said. I want to talk about this 100-year Starship program that you're involved in. So first of all, can you just tell us what it is and what it hopes to achieve and why?
So I think I have some slides on 100-year Starship. So 100-year Starship is a program that's really about making sure that the capabilities for human travel beyond our solar system to another star are a reality within the next 100 years. I led the team that won the seed funding from DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, to win this seed funding grant, and a very modest seed funding grant. And the idea was that we wanted to use this as a platform to really push innovation. So when I started looking at 100-Year Starship, what we want to do is build really a global network of research, innovation, and outreach and partner with different people. No one organization can make this happen, right? But you can help to create an environment where big, bold things can happen. So 100-Year Starship is really about building a platform. But to talk to you about why this makes a difference, let me tell you about Interstellar, because we're used to Star Trek, we're used to going to Mars, and we think about going to Mars. I don't think Mars is as we know how to go to Mars. I mean, people will tell you there are some engineering challenges, but we've been there. We know its address. We have things crawling around on it since I was a little kid, right? There's some life sciences issues that may go on, but it's really something we know how to do. But if you go into Interstellar, let's talk about what Interstellar means, going beyond our solar system to another star. So this quote that's up there about putting 3 grains of sand inside a vast cathedral and understand that that cathedral will be more filled with sand than space is with stars. Just sort of getting a visceral feeling for what this is. I have a couple more. So when we talk about going to another solar system, when we look at space exploration right now, that's what it's like. So I am actually on that shuttle. That's actually my shuttle launch. We're not, yeah, I'm on the mid-deck. You don't see me. If you have X-ray vision, you can see me, but not. But that's basically what space exploration looks like now. That's what like the launch systems look like. Even though we're not launching the shuttle anymore, if you go to Baikonur, if you are looking in China, it's basically a lot of chemical propulsion. We couldn't go to the stars like that because there's not enough chemical propulsion to do it. It's going to be very different. It's going to be a ship, that the Empire State Building would be smaller than that. It's going to be something different. It's not going to look like that particularly, but it's going to be very different than where we do space exploration now. If we look at it another way, this is space exploration for years. This is my proof of. But if you didn't know that I wasn't on space station, or if you weren't a big space historian and stuff, you could almost look at that and it looked like space station. It could look like Skylab, right? It's looked the same way for 50 years or more. But space exploration, when we go to another star system, is going to be different. When we go from low Earth orbit Interstellar, it will be as different from that as it is being on the bridge of Enterprise. That's my other proof of picture, right? So if you have a picture with Worf, you show it. But it's going to be that fundamentally different. It's not going to be the Enterprise, but I want you to sort of think through this. So let's talk about it another way, and I use the United States as a scale of travel. So if you think about Los Angeles on the West Coast, and you think about New York City on the East Coast, think about LA as being Earth, New York City as being Alpha Centauri, which is our closest neighboring star. Alpha Centauri is 25 trillion miles away, is 4.2 light years away. That's the distance light travels in 4.2 years. Just to put that in context, light travels from the sun to the earth in 8 minutes, and that's 93 million miles. So I'm just trying to put this in context so we know what we're talking about when we do the challenge of Interstellar. Voyager, which you heard about, just left our solar system. It's been traveling at over 35,000 miles per hour since 1977. And it has only traveled the equivalent of 1 mile on the journey from Los Angeles to New York City in that time. It would take Voyager 70,000 years to get to Alpha Centauri, traveling at 35,000 miles per hour. So it means we have to go much faster, right? Because we weren't cave painting well back then, right? 70,000 years ago. We have to go much, much faster. So it all of a sudden creates a challenge that's very different than even going within our own solar system, right? It's a very different challenge. It means that we have to have much better energy, right? We can't do it using chemical propulsion. If we wanted to get to some percent of light speed, sort of make it a 50-year trip, you can't do it using chemical propulsion. There's not enough chemical propulsion in the solar system to get a large vehicle to that speed. So we're going to have to do it through fission, fusion, or antimatter. We are going to have to generate and control and store these tremendous amounts of energy. And imagine what would happen if we even do a little bit of that in terms of energy. We're going to have a closed loop system, because you're going to have to take everything with you. The sustainability makes a difference. You have to look at agriculture and the microbiomes, because you can't do it stopping off for groceries. You know, once you get to going that fast, you're going to have to keep going. And you're probably not going to come back. So you're going to have to actually look at how do you sustain stuff for a long period of time. Right now here on Earth, we grow our food. We have this tremendous system of these microbes in the soil. And they're what help plants fix nitrogen and do so many other things. Right now, we don't really understand that. We have other microbes in our gut, on our skin, that allow us to digest things, that keep us healthy. We don't really understand what that is. And until we actually get a better handle on it, we can't stay out for long periods of time, because it gets renewed here on Earth. We wouldn't renew it there. So this is the real issue. And even human behavior, think about it. I believe the long pole in the tent is human behavior. One of them is, how do you invest in something that's so far away, that's such a long period of time, that it doesn't give you the regular return on investment, that you can't say in 5 years, here's what's going to happen. But the other part of human behavior is, say you get the ship built, you have 1,000 people on board, 500 people, whatever, you decide you need the mix up. Everything's going well. You could get there in 50 years. About 10 years out, I'm feeling real jazzy, and I say, I'm not doing that. I know you were in charge when we left. No, you can't make me. Right. And what is a governance? How do you get people to work as a team, as a group, over this period of time? The reason why this is so important for life here on Earth, when we talk about transforming life here on Earth, is because if I were to talk to you about world peace, it's laughable. But if I were to say, let's figure out how do we get 5,000 people in an isolated environment to work well together to be healthy, it becomes a laboratory. Right? If we started to talk about energy and propulsion now, it becomes a laboratory. So it's really a platform for trying really difficult things. Interstellar is something we don't know how to do, so it allows us to leap forward, to take bigger steps, to do things bigger than we could do before. 100-Year Starship really started as an initiative out of DARPA, that they were looking at how do we get transformative innovation. The space program with the Apollo brought about really transformative innovation. Going to Mars isn't going to do that, because, again, we know how to do Mars. But going to outside of our solar system pushes us in ways we wouldn't think of before.
And do you think that's a different from where we are in general with science and technology in the culture, in terms of, from where I sit, it looks like it's all about inventing something that Google will buy or that Facebook will buy. They're very short-term goals, as opposed to this kind of, as you say, audacious kind of goal.
I think that we are at a point in time where we're a little bit timid, right? Where we want to do incremental things, where they always have to. So a lot of grants these days, when even you're doing basic research, they ask, what are you going to discover in year 3, in year 4, in year 5? Well, it's not really basic research if I can tell you what I'm going to discover in year 3, year 4, and year 5, right? And it's that basic research that's actually fueling what we have today. When we look around, and I think I have some slides in here somewhere. When we look around, lasers are everywhere, right? There are a few people old enough in here with me that you remember when lasers were a big deal. Remember? There's like, it's a laser, right? It's like, it's a laser. And I know that, the young folks in here don't get excitement about lasers. Like, they're really great. But lasers are everywhere now. They're in Blu-ray players. We have them in pointers. They're everywhere. We do eye surgery with them. We do things now with lasers, with cosmetic surgery, everything. But it was 50 years ago that they were coming out and they were really being researched, and we really didn't know what they're going to be used for. DNA research, right? Understanding the structure of DNA, understanding how RNA is translated into proteins and stuff. That was just basic research, trying to think about it 40 years ago in the 60s and the 70s. DNA research was even before that. But yet when we look at genetic engineering right now, that's what we're basing it on. Our personalized medicine, that's what we're basing all these things on. So it's really about how do we do something big? How do we challenge ourselves? So I agree with you. This is about coming up with challenges, being able to do something audacious, because we are very incremental these days. And if we don't create something and do research on things that we don't know how to do, we won't have this feedstock 20 years from now, 30 years from now.
I know that there are probably a lot of questions in the room, and I want to just bring things back to reflect on the relevance of Star Trek. 50 years, and hard to believe, after the original series aired. So at the time, and in the years afterwards, Star Trek contributed social commentary through the guise of sci-fi. How much of Star Trek's social commentary do you think is still relevant today?
I think a lot of it is, and I'm going to do something. I'm sorry, Nora. I want to talk about some things, because I know you guys have talked about Star Trek. I know a lot of people know a lot about Star Trek, right? So what I'm going to just do just for a second is to talk about real interstellar. Like, can we do this? We're at a point in time now where we have the opportunity to really push and try to do this, not just fictionally, but really. And I'm talking about it not to be aggrandizing and just talking about 100-year Starship, but literally DARPA looked at saying, how can we get outside of our solar system with humans on board? And I want to just talk about why that makes a difference and some of the other work that's going on. I was talking about 100-year Starship. Our logo is about the Canopus is a star. This is in fiction and fantasy. Canopus is a star that's the second brightest star in the sky. You see it from the southern hemisphere. It's a star that was used for planting cycles in the Rift Valley. That from the time humans first started coming out of the Rift Valley, we were using that. It's a star that's used for navigation. It's known in all societies. In China, it's the old man star. It's a very audacious star. But it's also used for navigation here on Earth. But Voyager uses it for navigation along with the sun, right? To figure out where it's going. Has anybody read Dune or know the story Dune? It's the star about which the Spice Planet orbits. So there's this whole fictional piece. So we really recognize the importance of doing that and how different it makes. We talk about working with children because you have to start early. We talked about those kinds of things. Quick story, when we were putting together this with Scholastic and it was a 100-year Starship, do you know what they did? And I work with young men all the time, but they gave me a cover with a boy on it. And I said, can you give me some kids? Can we give a group of kids with different genders? But we honor science fiction because it helps to tell the story better. So what Star Trek did, for example, was to tell a story about social issues. It used science as a mechanism for doing that. How do you get people involved with things? We spend a lot of time with science fiction and telling stories. And also we have an award for science fiction writing. Here's our sort of homage to Star Trek when you look at the kinds of things that you think of. Kirk, right? And, a little bit later, there we go with the flip phones, the tablets. We have those. We can look back through and see those. The telecommunications over a period of time, the Google Glass and the heads-up display. each time we look and we start to imagine these things, you can sort of see the timelines are almost becoming closer together because we can start to imagine and things accelerate that way. We do these Canopus Awards for excellence in interstellar writing because you have to tell the story. And so we want to know, how do we get more people involved? Space has been one of those things that everybody is interested in, right? We don't all want to go. We're not all volunteering, but we've looked up at it. The reason why I think it's important and what you talked about with Star Trek is because Will and Errol Durant said the future never just happened, it was created. We have the opportunity to create the future now. When we're looking at what happens with space exploration, I always think of it as one of maybe those possibilities where we can start to see ourselves as a species. I think that's one of the things that Star Trek did very well. Because the bridge was populated with people from all around the planet, we started to see ourselves as a species until we are, and as earthlings even. And until we start seeing ourselves as earthlings, so many of the problems that we have in the world aren't going to be solved if we don't see ourselves as sharing them. It's one of those things that, you know, to me is really critically important. I just want to show you some other things about some of the people involved. I just came and this thing says space is not just for rocket scientists and billionaires. Well, there's almost this commentary nowadays where, we hear about people who have a lot of money being involved in space exploration, and it's really important that they are involved from the private industry. I'll be happy to talk about Breakthrough Starshot and other things, but it's everybody else that's going to make it happen. That's where the commitment comes in. How do we give a way for different people to be involved? That's how Interstellar will happen. This is Amy Millman, who is the head of something called Springboard Enterprises, which is for women technology companies. Over 10 years, her company's raised over $6 billion. This is Lou Friedman, who was a co-founder of the Planetary Society, along with Carl Sagan. So we work with lots of different people. This is Carl Espelon, who's an art anthropologist, but a professor of textile and design. Carl has done some of the most creative work that we've had in 100 Year Starship, never involved with space exploration before, but he talked about how clothing makes a difference to who we are, and as we start to ruggedize our clothing, right, because we can't carry up boxcars of clothing, we're going to have to change materials. Imagine what happens to those materials if we can use them here on Earth. Clothing is one of the most toxic, resource-intense things that we do. Jill Tarter and Jenny Young. Jill Tarter is the co-founder of the SETI Institute. If anybody, this is life and fiction coming together. Has anybody seen Contact? Remember Jodie Foster's character? Jill Tarter is a person that Carl Sagan based Jodie Foster's character on because she's the one who stood out and said, we want to look for extraterrestrial life and we're going to look at those signals. Jenny Young is from Shanghai, China. She runs something called the Beautiful Life Development Plan Foundation. She's interested in how these things help us with life here on Earth. That's me with the resident artist at SETI Institute. SETI has an artist in residence who helps to transfer ideas. Casey Hudson, who helped to develop Mass Effect, which is the video game. Anybody played Mass Effect? So why are we playing with video game people? Because they did an incredible job talking about people and who you could be and the decisions that you make, as well as incredible technologies, right, with data compression and representing things. So having lots of people involved. We did science fiction stories night. So the people here, one of my favorite science fiction books is called The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. I don't know if you've never read it, I would suggest you do. It talks about first contact, but told from the point of view not of the engines, but of the people. And she's a biological anthropologist, right? So she talks about the biology, the anthropology, that goes along with how these interactions. And so really working with award-winning scientists, there's LeVar Burton. You can sort of see him sort of with his head sticking there. And our resident science fiction expert is Dr. Ronki Olabisi, who's a professor of biomedical engineering at Rutgers University. So she talks about science fiction and the importance of it. This was me, LeVar, and Jill, and Benjamin Palmer, who has this incredible group called the Barbarian Group that talked about social media at South by Southwest, you know, with a panel on how do you talk about Interstellar? Why do you get people involved? And then finally, I have a picture here of Mbanene Mfuhe, who is the Deputy Director of Department of Science and Technology in South Africa, who we work with. He talked about the fact that South Africa is building the world's largest radio telescope called the Square Kilometer Array. And so you said, right, South Africa, why are they building a radio telescope? So they're one of the countries in Southern Africa. Australia has part of it, but South Africa has the largest part. Mbanene said that people ask him, why would South Africa do that? When there are issues of poverty, there are issues of, you know, why are you doing this? Shouldn't you be doing something else? He said, no, because first of all, there's this incredible wealth of technology development and ideas and pride that comes with building this. And on the other hand, he said, people dream. You know, people dream of other things. Even a person who sleeps on a mud hut on the floor without a cover, they don't just dream of food on a cover. They dream of the stars and doing wondrous things. And so it's really about how do you get lots of people connected in. That's what, you know, these perspectives that you talk about do. It's really about how do we connect these pieces. You know, that's what we're doing when we talk about Interstellar. It's dreaming bigger than what we know how to do. And how do we get different people involved?
Fantastic. I'm sure there are a lot of questions in the room. I want to open things up to the room. Who has a question for Mae? I think we have people with microphones who are coming by.
Well, thank you for what you said, because it really surprised me. I cannot, I don't wish to make any other further comment except thank you, because it just opened up a whole world to me. Now, a practical question which I would like to ask you is, have we come any closer, in any way, to understand what keeps our Earth flopping around and doing what it does every day, and so all the other planets of our solar system. So what is the energy which keep them going? Do we have any understand of what it is?
I'm not really sure, so I'm going to try to craft something around the question. So one of the things that's really interesting as physics has gone further, and part of that has been our ability to look into space, we've started to understand more. Last night I was at something called the Breakthrough Awards, which is this award ceremony for people in physics and life science and mathematics. And there was a group that got a special award for actually detecting gravitational waves, which becomes very fundamental in us understanding a lot about what makes our universe hold together, right? So we don't have a grand theory that says here's how everything works that connects magnetism with gravity. That's still open. But the fact that we've detected gravitational waves back in 2015 means that, you know, some of these things are coming together. So there's more understanding, and those gravitational waves were assumed to be from two black holes colliding, that you could sort of tell from the way the signals that you got that it was from two black holes colliding. So it means that a lot of our speculation and our theories may be very, very good. We still don't know dark matter, dark energy, but it's starting to become a way of trying to understand that. There's still so many questions to be answered about why the universe acts exactly like it does. But we understand enough about the orbits of planets, around stars and things like that. But we can actually even start looking for other planets around other stars. So we see exoplanets now, and now as people even start to look at visualizing them. One of the things that I was going to mention is a project called Breakthrough Starshot. And you may have heard of it about earlier in April. It was announced as trying to send a probe to Alpha Centauri. So taking a really tiny probe, so about the size like this of a microchip, and propelling it using lasers and a solar cell that's about 4 meters wide. So that's something to be able to do it to get a probe in 20 years to Alpha Centauri, going 20% the speed of light. Imagine what would happen if we were able to send a swarm of probes, and on each probe, you could actually put different kinds of instrumentation. You don't have to have a great big old probe like we send now, right? So each probe could have different instrumentation that you could have cameras, you could have different kinds of gas sensors, you could have temperature sensors, and send this swarm of probes, and within 20 years, being able to get information from another star. So that would even help us understanding what the interstellar medium. So I don't have the answer to your question in terms of, do we know everything? No, we don't, but we do know enough to be able to actually think that we could get a probe to another star system. So that's some of the work we also are collaborating with the group on that. And so it's a really exciting time, which is the reason I wanted to talk about sort of real interstellar, because we're at a really interesting cusp now where we could move forward, and we, not only just seeing ourselves as part of the solar system, but seeing ourselves as part of this greater universe.
Mm-hmm. More questions over here?
And there's some down front too.
Okay. Thank you for coming to talk with us. As a teacher, I really enjoy science, and I really enjoy pushing science to my students. Even though I teach ESL, a lot of the times my students light up when that topic comes up, because from children to adults, they just love science and everything that comes with it. But also because science is something that fosters the idea of making mistakes, and then you kind of go past that. So like you go, oops, and then you figure out what you did wrong. So what are some of the things that adults in your life have done when you were a child to foster more of that natural scientific curiosity that you had?
So I think one of the hallmarks of science is really critical thinking skills. So being able to assess and look at things and, yes, sort of think through them. I'm not going to talk about me because I'm old. I'm going to talk about what I do with kids. So we put together programs called The Earth We Share, where we have kids solve problems. And so solving those problems with discipline. So we put together International Science Camp. Kids solve problems like predict the hot public stocks of the year 2030. This was back in 1994 and 1995. Or design the world's perfect house. What does that mean? So now all of a sudden, if you give a problem just open like that, then you have to figure out, what does perfect mean? What is a house? What part of the world you're going to be talking about. And when we had students working on this, 12 to 16, and they're working in groups, in teams, when they came from different parts of the world, they came up with things for a house ranging from, it should be a house that could be used anywhere on the planet, right? Or it's a house that is has zero impact on the environment. Or some people said, well, we're just going to break down into a luxury house that has everything, right? But it's helping them come through that perspective and use their own innate motivation. It doesn't mean that they can just come up and say something. We required them to ask questions, to go out, do research about things. And it's when you capture them that you get them to learn, right? Think about the fact that you don't even recognize you're working on something when you're really engaged in it, when you really think it makes a difference. And I think that's part of what we need to do with curriculum. That's the reason I think the hands-on piece is so important, right? Because if you get to start working with your hands, we're three-dimensional beings. We touch and feel things. It makes a difference. One of the dangers we have these days is thinking that we can put kids in front of a tablet, computer, and get them to understand and do things. We're three-dimensional. We like to touch and feel and smell. When kids come out and shoot, they're building all these senses up. And so I think it's by challenging them, expecting them to do a good job that makes a difference. That's how you build it, is by letting them use their innate creativity, their innate curiosity, their innate sense of, I want to do well on things, and that satisfaction, that intensity that they have, and not take it away from them.
More questions?
Yep. Good evening. Thank you very much for, first of all, let me say thanks for coming here and imparting your knowledge. And I remember you were one of my inspirations, actually, so it's really happy to be here and share this with you. My dad at a Jet magazine, I think I saw you in there.
Oh my goodness.
And that's,
in the
that's way
orange
back.
flight suit. I didn't have the
I remember
orange
that
flight
same
suit with the
picture,
helmet,
that same picture
right?
with the helmet, and that's one
I
of
had
the
to show you
things-
some different pictures,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, but just getting to my questions, it's several parts. You being in medicine, basically in your time and space, did you, have any adverse effects from your time and space? I know Commander Kelly, they were doing all these, things on him and studies on him because of the adverse effects that space has or microgravity has on things like the eyes and, different parts of the body, physiology. I'm just wondering if you had anything of the sort. I'm just wondering how you think, we were talking about genetic engineering, DNA, how does that translate into our, wanting to proceed out into the solar system? And do you think that genetic engineering will have to play a greater role in terms of modifying our bodies to be able to withstand the harshness of, space so that we can be functional when we get to these far destinations? Yeah.
So let's start and come back to low Earth orbit and some of all the impacts and things that happen to you. When you go up in a weightless environment, so there are a couple of things that happen when you go into space. You go into a weightless environment, right? So the weightlessness causes things to happen. When you first go up, there is a mismatch, it seems, between your inner ear and your eye. There's something called space adaptation syndrome that happens the first 2 to 3 days. We think it may be a mismatch between the inner ear and the eye. The inner ear has no clue what's going on because the fluids circulate in the ear based on gravity, and things are moving around based on gravity, and there's no up and down, and your inner ear is like, wait a minute, what's going on? The eyes, I'm fine. There's the ceiling, there's the floor, so there's a sensory mismatch. They also think that it's a result of redistribution of fluid. So when you're here on the ground, you have a lot of fluid hanging down around in your legs. When you go up into space, it redistributes, and so you feel like your head is swollen, like you've been standing on your head for 2 hours. It's not a great feeling. So there's a lot of that happens the first couple of days. Basically, you start to urinate it out. You come to an equilibrium. Your inner ear sort of says, okay, I'm going to not worry about that. And it comes back together. So some of that goes away after 2 to 3 days. But other things happen. Here on Earth, your bone is constantly redistributing itself, right? And reforming itself. And it reforms based on how much force is on it. So bone lays down based on how much force is on it. If you're not putting force on it, it's reabsorbed and it doesn't put down any more bone because you don't need to. Same thing with your muscles. What happens with your muscles? When you don't use them, your muscles say, okay, I don't need to be used, so you lose muscle mass. Your heart is a muscle. Your heart doesn't work as it doesn't have to pump against this column of blood, so it doesn't have to work as hard, so it deconditions. So there's a lot of things like that happen. Other things that happen, so it's sounding really perilous, isn't it? But we look at countermeasures. Some of the bacteria in your skin becomes more pathogenic. Sort of normal bacteria becomes more pathogenic. Your immune system slows down a little bit. We started to recognize things that happen to your eyes. Then there's all the radiation, right? So when you're here on Earth, the Earth's atmosphere and magnetosphere blocks a lot of radiation. So when you get up into space, you're not covered by that. If you go out to Mars, if you go beyond the Earth's magnetosphere, you're going to get even more radiation. So those are all things we have to work with and counterbalance. People come up with different ideas from on the space station, working on the treadmill, running, stuff like that for the cardiovascular deconditioning. People talk about taking pills and things. Um, you'll see science fiction movies and things where they have something spinning, right? So you're creating an artificial gravity. There are ideas that you could have continuous acceleration, which would even speed up the trip because gravity is just acceleration. So you'd have continuous acceleration, which would cause another type of artificial gravity. You can talk about carrying up lead shields to block radiation, but that makes the vehicle too heavy. So could you create a magnetic field around things? We're coming up with ways of looking at this. We learned more about how to um, re, uh, restore the body or protect the body against radiation damage. So there are a lot of challenges. I think the greater challenges is going to be around that microbiome, because you're in this closed environmental system where it's not automatically restored. You literally could not digest your food without the correct microbes in your gut, right? So if that's not restored, if we don't understand it, that's going to be a big problem. So there are a number of issues. There are countermeasures to things. Whether or not it's going to be genetic engineering or whether it's going to be able to understand what happens better now, I'm not sure. People talk about how do you deal with some of this, put people in suspended animation. Well, we have to learn a lot more about suspended animation. So there's this range of capabilities. And what we were doing with 100-Year Starship, we talked about really jump-starting capabilities. So we were looking at something called, where we created this workshop around the virtual human. How do you wholly model human physiology and health to such an extent that you could carry your infrastructure with you? So as we learn more about what happens to your physiology, we're able to investigate it, because you're going to be, billions of miles away from the Earth. And so you're not going to be able to rely on the Earth's infrastructure. You're going to have to be able to create your own medications and therapies that involve it. So you need to understand and be able to model human physiology much, much better than we do now. So it's sort of a range of things that happen. But, so in my hope, older people have less sensitivity to radiation. So I could be a good Mars candidate, right? There you go.
Questions up here?
Good evening, Dr. Jemison, and welcome to Toronto. Thank you so much. My question is, do you think that we will see or will need a tipping point where, as a global culture, we'll feel the urgency to get on board with an interstellar project, like this tipping point being some global threat, an asteroid, climate change, etc.?
I'm trying to figure out a way of saying this with a really optimistic slant to it. And the reason my optimistic slant is I hope that we don't have to do it from a threat. Because the reality is, if we don't figure out that we're a species, we will never meet the threat piece. The reality, I think that let me do it a different way. People say humans explore. It's our curiosity. I think life explores. I think life expands, right? The difference is with humans, we may have the ability to do more directed expansion. And when people ask me, what do I mean by that? There was a story about a mountain lion that was seen somewhere in the Midwest of the U.S., and then they found him over in New England somewhere. He was exploring, right? We do these things, and so I think it's one of those things that we have to embrace. If we have to wait and say that it's a global threat, that we're going to do, climate change is the reason we have to leave this planet, we have to recognize a couple of things. Most of us are not going to get off. So are we, not only us, but our grandchildren, our grandchildren's grandchildren, and you go on and on and on, they're not going to get off. So if we have to wait and say it's climate change, that's the reason why we have to have a plan B, I'm not satisfied with that. That's not sufficient for me. the asteroid threat, so they said we have to have at least humanity will survive someplace else on Mars. Um, yeah, okay. But again, who chooses, who decides who gets to go, who's not only whose genetics get to go, but whose culture gets to go, whose worldview gets to go. So there's a lot of pieces in that it sounds really good, and I can sort of see the argument in it. But I think, sometimes maybe we do have to see a threat to us as earthlings. But maybe we could see a hope as earthlings as well. I think that sometimes if we were able to get to Mars and we start to see this is Earth as our home, maybe we start to have a better feel for it. Or if we're on the moon and we're looking down and we had a moon base, maybe we start to see this as our home. Maybe we start to get a better feel for it. So yes, the threat or the idea of being someplace else could be, if something catastrophic happening to Earth might be a motivator. But if we're not working on it now, by the time we see it, it's going to be too late.
Questions?
Hi, good evening. Hi, good evening. As a young girl who loves sciences, you are an affirmation to me. And as a Black woman who has made a legacy of accomplishing many historical firsts, what is a specific up-and-coming STEM field you would encourage like Black teen girls or even Black women who are considering second careers to pursue, so that that Starship and Biosystem Station can be sent to Canopus and we could build a space station on Mars?
So the interesting thing about space exploration, there is not one field. It actually runs the range, the gamut of human experience and skill sets. And so I wouldn't say you have to find one thing for that. It's really, we need people in the life sciences, and within the life sciences, from genomics and proteomics to, rehab medicine. We need the range of things, to agriculture. We need propulsion folks. We need people who talk about investment and finance. We need people doing material sciences, whether it's in fabrics or whether it's in what a vehicle is made out of. So there's not one thing if we're trying to get to go. Now, for me personally, I want you to work on suspended animation, right? I mean, personally, but I'm not going to be that selfish, right? But I think that there's a number of things. So you don't have to do one thing. One of the pieces that I believe that's always been true, but perhaps we're recognizing more and more, is the need for transdisciplinary work and transdisciplinary understanding. Notice I didn't say interdisciplinary, I said transdisciplinary, because so many solutions go across things, right? They don't, they don't just stop with one thing. They're not just between two fields, but they go across fields. And that's how we get to where we want to be. So I don't have just one answer for you. Here's what I will tell you, though. For everybody who sometimes feels like perhaps they don't belong, they don't have a right to be there, you have every right to be there. If you ever need anybody to give you justification for being there, I'm going to raise my hand. Think about me, for whoever you are, right? We each have a right to be involved. Sometimes people say, well, I can't do space, right? I'm not a rocket scientist. Yes, you can do space, right? We each have something to contribute. That orange flight suit picture, my suit tech was the first person from her family to graduate from high school. She didn't have a college degree. My life depended upon her, right? The lawyers who were there, the secretaries, all of us have a right to be involved, the people who tell the stories.
We have time for one last question, I think.
Oh, thank you. I'm such a pleasure to have you here. Sorry, I'm just working on my question. When you mentioned South Africa, I thought it was really amazing, because I was there in 2010. I remember I ran out of gas in the middle of nowhere and looked up at the stars, and I just had that memory of how apparent they were to me. And I'm just thinking about it. Made me think about light pollution and sort of like combination of things. So I was thinking, like, given the sort of what seems to be a dumbing down of science in America, North America, like where, we hear politically, especially, like that there's very little, like it just seems like there's a huge dumbing down, and that science isn't respected in this way it seemed to be, like certainly during the Apollo program, and also that most people are moving into the cities, and so we don't really see the stars like we did as kids, camping or whatever. Um, do you think it's time, or is anybody looking at maybe recruiting and working on a program to recruit people from areas where there is more of the stars, because I imagine the imaginations of them and the dreams is like, and the passion for thinking about space is maybe a lot more, especially going more around the world, and again the diversity than what we're probably going to be getting in terms of North America, for instance, in terms of like the crop of people who like have that sort of a passion. Just wonder if there's anything like that.
Well, I'm going to go and start with what you talked about being in South Africa, the southern hemisphere. You can see the Milky Way so much more clearly. And I used to say, as a little kid, I lay outside on a summer's night in Chicago and I'd look up at the stars. And then I realized that you can't necessarily see the stars anymore because there's so much light pollution or the type of lights there. I realized that there are children in New York City, for example, who don't see the stars. They see the moon, so there's still some celestial thing going on. So I think that the idea is to try to put together a time where we turn off the lights. One of the things we've been wanting to do with 100 Year Starship is to put together projects where we can get people to have a day where they actually see the stars. I mean, it's completely different if you go outside at night and you look up. Even me, I mean, I sort of like wow, right? It completely changes you. It connects you to the universe. The thing that happened to me in space was this feeling, not so much that I was back here on Earth. A lot of people talk about this overview effect with astronauts, and astronauts say everything that I am is here on this Earth. For me, it wasn't that. I never believed the Earth had lines and borders and things like that. I always believed that we're connected. But what was very powerful is that I felt like I was connected to the rest of this universe. Right? That I was as much a part of it as any speck of stardust, and that we actually are made of the stuff of stars. Think about it. We actually share these molecules. If we can get people feeling that, it gives us a sense of connection that I think is very hard to get in other ways. But you do have to see the stars sometimes to feel that. So if we can find a way to get all students, all people to have this opportunity to see the stars in all their glory, then it makes a difference. It's important that we do that. And there's nothing like it in the world. It doesn't make me feel small. It makes me feel bigger, much more expansive. And as I sort of end this up, I really want to invite people to join us, 100 Starship. We really want to make this journey of interstellar flight a reality. And I just want to end with a couple of things, just sort of saying the reason why this is important is because all the capabilities required for successful journey to the stars is needed to survive as a species on this planet. And sometimes we don't see it, we wouldn't do it without it, but that's the reason why it's so critical. And what we're really interested in is believing that there is a better future. That's what Star Trek did. Right? It said that we had a better future, that we were going to make it through. It was a hopeful one. There are all these science fictions that are so dark, right? But Star Trek was in its surface very hopeful. We believe that there's a better future for us, and what we want to do is inspire this collective, inclusive ambition for humanity, that we can see ourselves as together. And even though this is a mission for interstellar flight within the next 100 years, it's really a journey designed to enhance life here on Earth. When Eugene Cernan went to the moon, he said, "We went to explore the moon and in fact discovered the Earth." And the question I would ask is, what will we discover from another star? What do we find? And so I would ask you, invite you to be a part of it, help us work on it. There are lots of people working on things, but 100 Year Starship is 100yss.org. It didn't start only with Star Trek. Star Trek very much fostered it. Star Trek fosters those dreams all along, right? It helps us to see the possibilities. It gives us a bright future. But we're on the cusp right now of being able to make these things happen. And I would ask you to join us.
Would you please join me in thanking Mae Jemison? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mae, and thank you, Nora, and thank you to you. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mae. It was very inspiring, and we look forward to hearing more news about the 100-Year Starship initiative. While you exit, please take a look at this message from our partners at CBS. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed it. Those were 5 Trek Talks, and we look forward to seeing you to more programming at TIFF by Lightbox. Thank you again. Hi.
Space. The final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship. Space. The final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Enterprise. Her ongoing mission to explore strange new worlds. To seek out new life and new civilizations. To boldly go. To boldly go where no man has gone before.
Celebrate 50 years of Star Trek.
Cheers.
With the limited edition gift set, get 30 Blu-ray discs featuring the original show and movies with the original crew, plus the animated series for the first time on Blu-ray, along with a 2-hour multi-part documentary. And available in this gift set, get a 50th anniversary badge, 6 mini movie posters, and hours of special features.
Is that all you gotta say?
And experience the Wrath of Khan Director's Cut.
Fire!
On Blu-ray for the first time ever, including nearly 30 minutes of new bonus content.
I would not presume to debate you. That is wise.
And for the first time in new ultra-slim Blu-ray sets, Star Trek, the complete original series, and the Next Generation complete series.
Sophisticated technology.
Resistance is futile. Surrender and prepare to be boarded. That will be the day. Fire!
Add to your Star Trek collection.
Let's make sure that history never forgets the name Enterprise.
Available on Blu-ray today. And look for Star Trek and Star Trek Into Darkness. Available for the first time in stunning 4K Ultra HD. Plus, don't miss Star Trek Beyond, coming soon on Blu-ray and digital HD.